starting recording. 3, 2, 1. And we are live on a Friday night at 7:30. Welcome to episode 180 of Aid Thompson and Other Disappointments. I'm your host, Aid Thompson. You're very welcome here. Pull up a pew, grab yourself a beer as we delve into this week's news, politics, dystopia, and shit. If it's your first time joining us on the podcast, what we usually do, right? So I do a Wednesday show, which is a solo show, which is where I just rant and rail and ridicule, I don't know, politics in general, Tories. I try to make sense of the senseless, guys. And then on Friday night, I invite a guest on to help me put the world to rights. And this week, I'm very, very honoured to be joined by my guest this evening. You might have seen him and heard him on radio, television. He's a comedy veteran. He's a musician. He's an author. And a pretty solid stand-up comedian also. Please welcome to the show, Mitch Benn. Woo!
Hello, Aid.
Hello. How you doing, man? How's your week been?
Busy, which I think is good. I'm actually, I'm having quite a good time though, because I'm in a newish relationship. We've been together for about 8 months, but one thing which my newish better half, Kathy, is doing is she's a really kind of committed, like, gig goer and show goer. She goes to a lot of things, and that's a habit I never really developed because I've been doing stand-up comedy since I was 21, and that was over 30 years ago now.
Right.
So I used to be busy like 4 or 5 nights a week. So on the times I wasn't gigging, I would just sit in front of the TV. So I've not ever really got into the habit of being an audience member, And Kathy's remember, because I've kind of, after lockdown, I've cut my live comedy stuff right down. I'm still touring under my own name, I'm still doing festivals and stuff. But as regards club gigs, I'm not really doing as many of those as I did prior to lockdown, largely because I discovered during lockdown that I actually got by okay without them. So I thought, well, okay, I don't think I necessarily want to hurl myself back into that as much, because I'm a bit old for it, apart from anything else. When you get to my kind of age, you've either gotten famous or give up, and I've managed to do neither. So I'm often when I still do mixed bills, I'm often not just the oldest guy on, but I'm the oldest guy by about 25 years.
Right. So are you so this week you've been out and about?
It's what I've been doing. I've been going to lots of shows and gigs and plays and stuff, and it's been brilliant. In particular, last week, I think it's still running. If you can, Lenny Henry's doing a monologue called August in Britain, which he wrote himself, and it's about Windrush Gate.
Right.
And it's absolutely electrifying. It really is. He's doing it in a tiny little theatre called the Bush Theatre in Shepherd's Bush.
Right.
Just at the end of the Uxbridge Road. So anybody in London, I don't know how sold out it is. I suspect it because it's a tiny venue. It's the kind of place I'd be playing, and it's Lenny Henry. It's crazy.
Yeah, like little intimate art centre sort of style.
Yeah. I think it's an old library building or something. But the piece is absolutely electrifying. It's a real gut punch about Windrush Gate, about what a calculated injustice that was, and it really hasn't been properly redressed. It's still a bit of an open sore, but that's an electrifying piece. Of all the things I've seen recently, that's the thing which people should really try and get along to.
It's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's like a completely different experience going to gigs and consuming art rather than the tenacity and the obsession that comes with actually like pursuing it yourself. Like you mentioned before about, you're out 3, 4, 5 nights a week, doubling up the gigs sometimes, like going from this little place to that little place and just trying to get as much stage time to test and hone. And you almost do you forget the reason that you began to love it in the first place in a weird way, right?
Was because that you're a consumer of it. It's true. And you sort of, and it's very, very important to keep at least half an eye or to try and be able to think yourself into the position of an audience member for your own stuff, because otherwise you can really crawl up your own arse. And because I'm trying to hammer the Edinburgh show together even as we speak, because that's coming down the tracks like it's
Yeah.
one of the things that, because I've done Edinburgh now. I mean, I've been doing it on and off for over 30 years, you know. But I mean, in particular, I've had a fairly solid run at it this last decade or so. Apart from the couple of years it wasn't really on during COVID. So like last year was on, and this year I'm on again. And what I do find is, and actually this is kind of what last year's show was about, because last year's show was called "It's About Time," and it's about the way time has been behaving very oddly for all of us, you know, with lockdown and everything, and also about time really starts to behave oddly when you get into my kind of, you know, age of life, you know.
Yeah.
But one thing I do discover is that doing Edinburgh year in, year out has got this awful accelerating effect on time, because it's like your entire year consists of 2 events and the build up to them, right? Because the minute you get back from Edinburgh, right, it goes dark, it starts raining, it's Halloween, it's Christmas. That seems to take about 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. And then the minute Christmas is over, I don't know whether people realize it, but basically the minute Christmas is over, you kind of have to decide if you're doing Edinburgh this year.
Yeah.
Because that's when that all gets decided, is in sort of January. And then the sort of the jockeying for position of the slots all happens in January and February. The print deadline for the brochure is like March. So you have to decide what you're doing and what it's called by March.
And at some point, I suppose you have to sit down, do the books, and work out how the fuck you're going to afford to put on an Edinburgh show.
Yeah. Well, I've never lost money at Edinburgh, and I'm quite. Last year,
That's quite a brag. I mean, I thought famously, like, people lose money at Edinburgh, don't they?
That has become part of the problem. Is that has become so much the received wisdom that, you know, you will get wiped out at Edinburgh. You know, and you'll lose 8 years, 8 grand even in a good year, minimum. You'll lose 8 grand.
Yeah.
To the point where a couple of whole generations of comics came down the line without ever, I think, investigating ways of not losing 8 grand.
Do you get like mad entrepreneurial about it? Do you like sell loads of T-shirts and?
Oh, I always do merch. Yeah, I mean, funny enough, something I'm actually plugging at the moment is the 25th anniversary reissue of my first ever album.
Yeah.
Because when I came down to London in '96. And sort of became like the cancellation king in '97, you know.
Right.
But we got my first mobile phone in '97 because, you know, it's sort of, there were a lot of smallish grassroots kind of clubs in London in those days. I think there probably still are. I mean, I don't really spend that much kind of time doing that kind of thing these days, but I think it's all still out there. And I mean, this is the other thing. I do get people ask me, how do you get into comedy? And I say, well, I could tell you how to get into comedy in 1995.
Yeah. The shit's changed.
Exactly. Tell me how to get into comedy in 2023.
It's fucked, man. It's like I've
been going for 10 years before YouTube even existed, and now you're getting people having entire careers on YouTube. You know?
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Like, when I started doing it, which was only like 12 years ago, I first tried it. And then it was still very much in this realm of like, yeah, you go to open mic nights, you die on your ass. Slowly over the space of like 6 months, a year, 3 years, you pluck out little, like, you cherry pick the bits that worked, and then you smush them all together, and then, you know, you end up with a 15-minute set of stuff that doesn't completely suck, and gradually you build up your reputation and your material. That was how it worked then. But now what I've noticed, and I actually feel like I'm a beneficiary of this, is that you can build your audience primarily, firstly, on the platform, and then take that to the stage. Whereas before it was like you got to build your audience on the stage, and then you'd end up in a sitcom or something, I guess.
Yeah, literally. I'm saying, you know, you've got guys having entire comedy careers on YouTube, and then if they ever actually even bother playing live, their first gig's the Shepherd's Bush Empire. You know?
But is it any good though? Like, that's the thing.
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, I've heard, because here's the thing. One of the things that's very difficult for my generation to get its head around is the idea of the sort of the YouTube celebrity. Because my generation, we see people doing stuff on YouTube there. Our brains just assume that what we're watching is a demo. It's a pitch. You know, this is sort of, hey, entertainment industry, here is me. This is what I can do. Pay me money, you know. But then you think, no, this is not a pitch. This is not a demo. This is it.
Yeah.
This is it. Because, you know, they've got like 2 million subscribers. Every time they put one of these things up, they're making 60 grand. You know, why are they going to sign to the Disney Channel?
Yeah.
You know, that's then going to start telling them what they can and can't do. And there's a possibility. And, you know, suddenly you can get fired, you know, and So we just always assume that that's kind of a demo. That's making your pitch to the industry. But no, it's bypassing the industry. And this
Yeah, yeah.
also gets me back to Edinburgh, which is of course a lot of my friends are not going this year because the accommodation in particular has just gone through the roof. Now, part of the reason the cost of accommodation has gone through the roof is local changes to the law in Edinburgh, which is actually benefiting people who are trying to live in rented accommodation in Edinburgh. So on the one hand, fair enough.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it's actually going to make it impossible to sustain the festival because this is something that the Fringe office, I think, occasionally need to be reminded of, is that you don't put this festival on.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
print a brochure and you sell tickets, and that's all you do. The
Yeah.
festival is put on for you by hundreds of performers who rock up every year on their own time and on their own dime to put these shows on.
Mm.
And if it just becomes prohibitively expensive, because people don't go to Edinburgh to make money, but they go to Edinburgh to either road test something that they're going to take out on the road, or to try and establish themselves as more than just a sort of a 20-minute club guy in the eyes of the industry. There
Yeah,
are
yeah.
ways but if that becomes prohibitively expensive, then you don't have a festival anymore.
Yeah.
You just don't have one. Because the other thing, which is what we back to this, is Edinburgh is not that primary route into the big leagues that it used to be, because there are ways now of essentially bypassing the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it's like,
you can connect directly with your public, and all the gatekeepers are essentially pricing themselves out of the equation.
yeah.
If you can find a way of connecting with your public, you can establish something with your public that's an ongoing thing that you are maintaining, that they are, absorbing, and nobody else is even in the equation.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I absolutely bloody love that, because nobody can fire you from your own YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Nobody can fire you from your own Patreon.
Yeah. Well, that's my sort of attitude to it, is like,
Yeah.
It sort of, maybe I'm being a little bit full of myself here, but I sort of am of the belief that if I continue with the podcast, if I continue putting out the clips and it continues to grow at a sort of self-perpetuating rate that it has done over the last couple of years, at some point somebody probably will tap me on the shoulder and say, I love what you're doing, how would you feel about coming to do it for us, and we'll pay you this figure. And I feel really fortunate to be in a position where I'm like, this isn't even my fucking job. Like, I have a job that pays the bills and the mortgage and everything, so I don't need to do this for like LBC or Talk TV. And I actually prefer it when it's a bit rugged, a bit punk rock, broadcasting from my shed, where I can say fuck, shit, cunt, bollocks.
Plus you've got nobody breathing down your fucking neck. You know what I mean?
And I think there's I don't want to sound like a sort of social media consultant with this stuff, but there's like an authenticism, to it.
Yeah, make sure you get rid of that middle T, authentic.
Yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right. And the thing is, ultimately, this is the whole, because what everybody's been looking for, essentially, is a way of getting paid for this shit. And the thing is, this is not actually new. There was, the entertainment industry, the media, whatever you want to talk about, it's only ever been the top slice getting paid anyway. You know what I mean? It's always been people doing it for fun, people doing it for shits and giggles, and right at the top, there's a thin layer of people actually making money,
Yeah.
And then at the top of that, there is a microscopically thin layer of people making the big bucks.
Yeah.
And that's kind of still the place, even in the new online economy. But it's just you can construct it for yourself more efficiently. And I remember having this conversation with a friend of mine many years ago, which is just that you only actually need, if you have like a hardcore fan following of about 500 people, what you need is people who are so into you that they're willing to spend between 50 and 100 quid a year on your shit, whatever that is. Whether it's records, whether it's concert tickets, whether it's merch, whatever. They are so into you that they will spend 50 to 100 quid a year on your shit. Now, if you've got, say it's the lower end, 50, if you've got 100 of those, then you're making, $5,000 a year. That's an income stream. You're not going to pay the bills with it, but it's an income stream. Say there's 100 of them, now you're making $10,000 a year. Okay, that is an income stream, And if you've got 1,000 of them, you're actually making money. Do you know what I mean? But you don't actually need the love and affection of the entire general public. What you need is a decent size but relatively small pocket of really devoted fans.
Yeah, and this
And
is
the great thing about the, just finish off what I was going to say.
Mm.
The great thing about now is they don't all even have to be in your country.
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah, it's like traditionally these people would have to be commutable to your gigs or
Yeah,
for you
yeah,
to post the t-shirt too. Now we're in a situation where, and I was just talking to a comedian I'm trying to get on in a couple of weeks,
yeah.
who's based in Australia.
Hmm.
And I was saying, look, I can't promise that you coming on my show will sell you many tickets in Melbourne or whatever,
Yes.
but what it will do is expose you to my, mostly domestic UK audience. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
reciprocally, what I'm looking to do is sort of branch out to a more international audience because,
Absolutely. Yeah,
then you do have, like, you're not restricted in the same way as
yeah,
you would be if your aspiration historically was to get a show on Channel 4. Oh, I want to do enough gigs to I get noticed by a producer at Channel 4 and
yeah.
then I'm popular in the UK and I can sell concert tickets. Well, great, but now in 2023, yeah, we can
Yeah.
market out to people in Italy or Australia or
Because
wherever.
I also know people who've had that big break,
Mm,
capital B,
yeah.
and it hasn't come to anything.
Yeah.
I've had friends who've had, their own show on Channel 4 or BBC Three or something, and it's come and it's gone, and they're back on the plantation. You
And
know what I mean?
it's
Uh,
a fuller or higher fall, I think,
yeah,
and the perception of it being sort of a failure or that you got dropped, I think,
yeah,
is
exactly.
so much more damaging than just stick to your own YouTube thing, grow it
Yeah,
modestly.
literally, exactly. So that's the thing is the big break ain't what it used to be.
Yeah.
It's not the guarantee of anything lasting. Don't know, even indeed it ever was. I mean, but that was the perception, wasn't it? That once you got your own show on Channel 4 or BBC Two, as was, then that was it. You were sorted. Really not the case anymore. Partly because, of course, the terrestrial channels don't have the reach they used to.
Yeah.
So you can actually have your own series on BBC Two and not that many people will notice.
Yeah.
Whereas the thing about something like this is A, you can build it up organically. B, nobody can fire you. I mean, yeah, you could fuck up to the point where you're abandoned by your fan base. I mean, that's available to all of us. At any given time, we could always
I
say
mean,
or
I
do.
tread that line quite often, Mitch, but yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. But at any given time, you or I can say or do something, and then literally log on to Patreon the next day and discover we now have 4 followers.
Yeah.
That could that's a risk we take every time we go on Twitter.
Yeah.
But it's you can't just be fired or just made redundant or just, as often happens, somebody else takes over the commissioning for whatever channel you're on, and because they're the new guy, they just reflexively bin everything the old guy liked.
Mm,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? Get that kind of new broom syndrome where somebody comes in and go, right, I'm in charge now, and just trashes everything the last person did because it's what the last person did. We're not vulnerable to any of that. And that's the great thing. I'm only accountable to my audience.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I am
the big thing.
accountable. Yeah, I
It,
am accountable to my audience. They are entitled. They are perfectly entitled to desert me for whatever reason at any given minute. But I'm only accountable to them. I'm not accountable to any head of commissioning of blah or line producer of this or
yeah.
or just you know
Yeah, I heard a comedian
you know
say something very similar. American chap was saying like he doesn't really care about if Twitter catches fire and people find
Mhm.
his stuff offensive and they say you got to boycott
Yeah,
this person, and he was just like they didn't buy a ticket for the show. If you buy a ticket to the show and you don't like it and you walk out, that's fine, that's your right. And
yeah,
if you bought the online content or whatever and you were a Patreon and you abandon it, fine, that's you having your say. But people who don't have any skin in the game, that have
yeah,
never invested in you,
yeah,
their opinion is just noise. And the only reason
yeah.
it catches fire now is because we have things like social media echo chambers amplifying it, and a load of hungry, desperate journalists going like, "Oh my god, did you hear what he said? He was talking about you. What do you think about that? Can we get a quote about how offended you are?" And
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Well, actually, something about that I'm quite proud of myself of is that I've been turning down TV things recently because I think finally matured to the level that I know when I'm being stitched up.
Right.
You know, because the classic example. Remember a couple of years ago when Crafty Wank had David Starkey on his podcast, and David Starkey was talking about the difference between genocide and slavery, and he said something really clanky like, "Well, obviously genocide and slavery are not things because there's blacks everywhere," you know. And I think it actually, you know, the point he was making was technically correct in as much as it went, but blacks as a noun is a bit clunky in the 21st century, and you know, there's really better ways of saying. I mean, Starkey, bless him, he only ever gets in the news when he says something racist, but anyway, or says something which can be construed as racist. And of course, everybody was up in arms about this because people, I think, were actually, you know, trying to get Grimes prosecuted under some kind of race relations act or something. And the question was, well, is it Grimes' responsibility for what goes in his podcast? And I weighed in stupidly, just on Twitter and everything, with the opinion of, well, actually, yeah, it is.
Mm.
Because when I was on BBC Radio, all our stuff was going through layers of lawyers
Really?
before it got to air.
Mm.
Yeah. The script was getting read by legal, you know what I mean, before it got to air. And then because ultimately the BBC, as the broadcaster, is responsible for the content it broadcasts. It's not necessarily the guy whose face the words are coming out of. It's the person who's putting it out there in front of the general public is responsible for that content, right?
Mm.
So I weighed into the opinion, well, actually, yeah, he is, because this is his podcast. He's producing it. He's editing it. He chooses what goes in. So, yeah, you could object to what Starkey said. And, you know, Starkey is responsible for the words that come out of his mouth, but Grimes is responsible for the content of his podcast.
Mm.
So, yeah, I'm fairly sure, purely on a legal level, that is actually Grimes' responsibility. And I got a phone call from GMB asking me if I'd come on and talk about this. And I said, no, because you don't want to talk about this. You want me to sit opposite Piers Morgan, so Piers Morgan can say, oh, I suppose everybody who disagrees with you is racist.
Yeah.
That's what you want.
It's a sort of,
I,
yeah.
I actually don't really have an opinion over whether what David Starkey said was racist. I think it was infelicitously worded.
Yeah.
But I don't really have an opinion of whether he is a racist or what he said is racist. But that's what you want to talk about, isn't it? You don't want me to pass the final legal points about who's responsible for the content of a podcast. You want me to sit there and let Piers Morgan say, oh, I suppose everybody who disagrees with you is racist, because that's the kind of TV you fuckers make.
Yeah, it's
So,
sort
you
of
know,
it's not a debate so much as a synthetic debate. It's they want something
exactly.
spicy. They
Yeah.
want person A and person B to have a little argument so they can cut it up into a little clip, pop it on
Yeah.
Twitter, and then watch that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's as clear an indication as anything about who's actually in the driving seat. So what we were talking about a minute ago about, you know, the sort of legacy trajectory that people would go on would start on the stage and graduate to TV, and now
Yeah.
it's like actually the content comes first and then maybe you move on to the stage afterwards. But it's like if what GMB, and they're not the only ones by all means, and GB News and, you know, probably Sky to some extent, if what they're after is sort of clickbaity, quick, spicy clips to draw people in and cake it in adverts, that tells you it's not even about the program anymore. It's all about social media, and social media is king.
So and social media runs on phony controversy.
Yeah.
And so if the controversy isn't there, we have to synthesize it. So yeah, I mean, yeah, so that's yeah, you're right. It is all about clickbait. I mean, but you know, Twitter is the thing. You know, I have a horrible feeling I'm going to be the last non-blue tick on Twitter, because it's going to take a lot to get me off there.
Yeah.
But you know, it's always been a bit poisonous, and it's getting more and more poisonous as Elon and the Tick Boys take over. You know, where the dick, there's a dick. You know, I mean, it's like you see any conversation on Twitter right now.
This is where I have to put my hand up and go, I have a blue tick.
Yeah, I don't anymore. Because I had a real one, you know, and I
Yes.
liked having a real one, you know, and I really did. And the thing is, it was actually quite a useful thing in terms of verification, because, you know, as our pal Tansky knows only too well, when you fall within certain people's crosshairs, the first thing they do is make a fake profile of you and get it to say all kinds of horrific things. And she's at any given time got about 4 or 5 fake profiles saying horrific things, you know.
Yeah.
Possibly because, is it 3 eyes as she spells it with at the end there?
Yes.
Yeah. So right, if you spell it with 4 eyes, it's very difficult to notice that it's not her. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's also so the reason I got my blue tick is the video length. That is literally
that's the only. I've been tempted by that. I'll confess, I've been tempted by that because I was always really bloody annoyed that for some reason Femi, hello Femi, gets these 8-minute videos out there, and I'm limited to 2 minutes 20, which is really annoying because most of the videos I actually post are songs, and it means my song lengths are restricted to 2 minutes 20, or indeed 2 minutes 10 if I want to get the Patreon bumper onto the end of it, you know. And that I've found quite restricting. And sometimes I've blown it and I can only put the first bit of the video up on Twitter and have to link it to the YouTube listing. So that, I'll confess, I've been tempted by. But it's the blue tick has gotten so toxified just in the last month that I don't think I'm going to do it now. Just because, well, the thing is, the only other ones who you can kind of let off the hook are the guys who got more than 1 million followers and they just never had their blue tick taken away in the first place. But I'm fairly sure that's illegal, by the way. Because essentially, by imposing the blue tick on everybody cool, whether they wanted it or not, what Elon is doing is essentially, it's called passing off in the advertising industry. Because my manager also managed Bruce Forsyth for his entire career from the 70s onwards. I do know that Ian, on a number of occasions, has had to sue radio ad agencies for getting somebody in to do the Brucey voice on a radio commercial.
Right.
Because essentially what you're doing there is laying claim to a celebrity endorsement that hasn't been granted. Do you see what I mean? By somebody doing a Brucey voice on your advert, you're essentially laying claim to the endorsement of Bruce Forsyth when Bruce Forsyth has not even been consulted about this. You see what I mean? So essentially, by making all the cool people keep their blue ticks, Elon is essentially going, look at all these cool people who are signing up to my Twitter blue, and says, like, no, they fucking haven't, you know. What I mean? I wouldn't be surprised if one of them sues him over that. But you're absolutely right.
The verification thing is a strange one, because my understanding of it is that they only introduced verification or verified accounts before because Twitter was getting sued by someone who said, look, you should do more. If somebody says that they are Aid Thompson and I'm Aid Thompson, you as the service provider, as a platform, you need to take steps and have some responsibility here to protect people like me and other people who are going to get conned by this person who they think is me, asking them to send them Patreon money or, you know, whatever the case may be. So they introduced this facility, this feature, to allow people to verify themselves if they were prominent, if they were likely to be aped in some fashion. Now they've removed that. I cannot believe that it will be long before somebody gets misrepresented and sues Twitter again. Like, it just seems like.
But it's bloody ridiculous, because the thing is, what somebody else could do right now, and you know, by saying this, I'm kind of inviting it, is somebody else could start a profile with a photo of me, call it Mitch Benn, pay the $8, and now they've got the blue tick.
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? But the stupid thing is it's like, this is the guy who's meant to be like the leading scientific and business mind of our generation, but he starts charging money for something at the precise moment he made it worthless.
Yeah.
Now, there's
with other people's money as well. Everyone's like, oh, I mean, Elon bought Twitter because he's such a fucking high-rolling big baller. Like, no! He borrowed a shit ton of, like, Saudi money, bought this thing, tanked the value in it.
But and then also starts charging for something at the precise moment he makes it worthless. I mean, the whole point about the blue tick was it was worth something because you couldn't buy it. That was why it was worth something. Now you make it, you know, and more to the point, because of most of, you know, present company accepted, most of the people who went ahead and bought it are, let's be honest, assholes.
There does seem to be a certain type of commenter.
You look at any conversation on Twitter right now, the guy who weighs in with the stupidest opinion will have a blue tick.
Yeah.
Guarantee you. The guy who weighs in, and it will be a guy.
Yeah.
Invariably, it'll be a bloke. The guy who weighs in with the stupidest opinion in any given conversation will have a blue tick. And it's usually the first blue tick into the thread.
Yeah. It's like the Downing Street crash yesterday when...
Just pay him, you know.
When the car crashed into the gates, and at Downing Street, and it was all over the news. And the first comment I saw underneath was a paid for blue tick by a guy saying, "I bet it was a pure blood." I'm like,
What?
like,
fuck is
how
pure
is it?
blood?
What's this got to do with vaccines and like jabs? Where has this come from? You click
What
on the
is a
account.
pure blood? Is a pure blood somebody who hasn't been vaccinated? Is
I
that
think
the
it's a pure blood is someone, yeah, who has been vaccinated.
in
Who
the
hasn't
Potter
been?
books? In the Potter books, it's somebody with no muggles in their family.
It's like,
I mean, that's the last time I was encountered the phrase anywhere. But
yeah, well, it's been reappropriated now as something to do with like vax and jabs and stuff. But yes, utterly ridiculous. Let's talk a little bit about the news actually. So
we probably should. That's kind of why we're here.
yeah,
So far, this is what happens when you get me on. I'm afraid.
no, it's good. It's good to have a talker on. Sometimes, do you ever have you ever been on the podcast where the other person on there is like, you know, quite introverted?
Yeah.
It's like,
well, the thing is, I am quite introverted in most respects. I mean, this is one because I've been doing those NGL questions, and I was getting bombarded. Some of them are quite interesting. Well, I said, an extrovert or introvert. So I'm fairly sure I'm what's called an extroverted introvert, which is that I'm a natural performer. I have literally no concept of stage fright.
right.
You put me, I've got the kind of brain that thinks that talking in front of 2,000 people is 10 times as much fun as talking in front of 200. You know what I mean?
Right.
I have the bit of your brain that gets stage fright. I just never developed that lobe. It's just
Oh
not
man,
there.
you're lucky.
But what? Yeah, exactly. That's not a boast. If anything, it's an admission. It's a level I've never had to test myself on because I just don't get stage fright. But by the same token, I'm ridiculously awkward in social situations, and given half the choice, until this new girlfriend started dragging me out to stuff, I would spend every minute I wasn't on stage basically at home by myself.
Yeah.
And this, so I think, I am in the process of getting diagnosed for autism, which is long overdue. But yeah, so look, I managed to steer the fucking conversation back to me. You literally 2 minutes ago said, "Let's stop talking about you," and I'm like, "No, let's talk some more about me." So yeah, right, I shall shut up and you do the news.
Okay, let's do this. Let's get into it. So, what's the big news at the moment? So, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is saying he's quite comfortable with Britain sliding into recession if it brings down inflation, which I thought was quite interesting. It's like, I mean, it's basically like between the Chancellor and the Bank of England at the moment, it feels like both of them have just taken their hands off the wheel. They're both like, well, recession's going to happen. Then the Bank of England are like, well, there's nothing we can do other than, take your fucking house away from you. Like, let's just let it happen.
But the thing is, it's become this sort of gouge economy, this gouge downwards economy, whereby everybody's getting squeezed. So everybody is gouging the people down below them on the food chain.
Yeah.
So what we've decided is that everything now has to be paid for and underwritten by the poorest members of society.
Yes.
The debt is being pushed down and down and down. The wholesalers, the suppliers are gouging the wholesalers. So the wholesalers are gouging the retailers. So the retailers are gouging the customers. And ultimately, everything is getting pushed down and down and down until suddenly they've decided that everything now has to be subsidized by the people who are already broke. Now, I'm no economist, but that doesn't feel very sustainable to me.
No, especially when we haven't really ever recovered from the 2008 crash. Like, we've been through the decade of austerity. We've made people poorer. We've given them less local services that they can rely on. We've slashed their universal credit. We've sprung up food banks on every street corner. We're not in a position where they recovered from that crash and now we're sort of taking a little bit away from them. What we're actually doing is taking already broke, hungry, miserable people and making them even more miserable. Like,
exactly, because somehow we've decided, on the one hand, we decided, there is no magic money tree, but apparently the poor are an inexhaustible source of funds.
Yeah.
And it's not going to happen. That rather smug little thing that people trot out. Of course, the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, the problem with capitalism is eventually other people run out of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
but you're right, though. Like, I mean,
everything depends on having a client base that are going to keep on purchasing your shit.
Yeah.
But your client base can't keep purchasing your shit if they're literally destitute.
Yeah.
And this is we seem to have decided that the way, the way forward is to just drive the already hard up into abject destitution and then just keep billing them.
Yeah.
Just keep billing because they'll find it from somewhere. No, they won't.
Mm.
And a lot of them are probably going to kill themselves. I mean,
Oh
that's,
yeah,
this
yeah.
is what the mental health of this country is death spiraling, and quite literally in a lot of cases. And you can't keep doing this. You can't just keep pushing the financial burden of sustaining the society down and down and down and down, and have it underwritten by people who are already broke. It's not going to work.
Mm.
It's
Well,
just not going to work.
the situation as it is now, and it will become in the next sort of 6 months or a year, is so in after the 2008 crash, things got harder in the sense that public services that people were reliant on began to get cut back.
Yeah.
Dole money was slashed. Taxes began to go up to pay the bill.
Hmm.
Like debt to GDP began to climb, and so taxes had to like a huge chunk of our tax money. Everyone's always like, "Oh, there's no magic money tree," or like, "What does all the money go?" It goes on fucking debt. Like so
Yeah.
much money paying on interest payments to bondholders and so on. And so we're now in a situation where people don't like the lower, like the working class and the underclass of society are now being pushed further and further, even away from like having the slashed public services and like ideas like the bedroom tax, like
Yeah.
pushing more people into tighter spaces. Actually, now what we're going to get to, with mortgages being this high and subsequently rents being this high, is people are going to move out of their private rental spaces and social housing, and you're going to start seeing people move into their cars and tents. Like
Yeah.
that's where it's going to get to
Yeah,
soon.
no, people are going to live in vans, absolutely, and or I don't know what, maybe something along the lines of those cooperative squats that started appearing in all the industrial buildings in the 70s, something like that.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. People are being forced off the bottom rung of the ladder. People are
Mm.
being forced down into essentially an economic bracket that doesn't theoretically exist.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're going to have to define it for themselves, and it's just not bloody sustainable. And quite, I mean, this is
It's so cruel though, isn't it, Mitch? Because it's like, so if like I did a TikTok on this yesterday about how like this is the fundamental problem with like Western liberal capitalism is like
yeah,
when you get in a spiral like this with inflation, it's like you were alluding to a minute ago. So gas prices go up, and then the people
yeah,
that ship the tankers go like, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm going to increase my prices. They sell
yeah,
it on to this guy, and then this guy goes, oh, gas has got to be expensive. I'm going to have to increase my prices. Then that gets down to the
yeah,
IBMs and the Ciscos and the Tescos and all like big head offices. And they'll be like, oh, it's costing so much to run the building, keep the aircon running and the heaters over
yeah,
here. We're going to have to increase our prices. And it works its way down the food chain, further down
yeah,
the food chain until it gets to the cost of food. And then it's like,
yes,
well, we're going to have to increase the cost of food because our prices have gone up. And then it gets down to the working class and this underclass. And then they walk
yeah,
into their manager's office and they go, well, there's nothing I can do. Like, everything's getting more expensive. I'm going to have to increase my prices. So can I have a pay rise, please? And then they're like,
fuck
fuck
off.
off.
Yeah, that would drive up inflation.
Yes,
Yes.
everything else is fine to increase. But when
Yeah,
you
exactly.
go
I mean,
into your.
I heard your podcast from last week where you said that your mortgage is about to double. Now, how does that not count as inflation?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
you know what I mean? For some reason that doesn't count as inflation.
It's like.
But the fact that the price of a mortgage has literally tripled in about the in and
Mm,
this ultimately I think is where it will bite them on the ass, is that they're starting to punish the I'm thinking of the Conservatives now. They're starting to punish essentially because the sheer level of cruelty that's being thrown around now, that you can't really exempt anybody from it as a sort of a matter of political I don't even know what the fuck I'm talking about, but you can't exempt your own base from anything anymore because there's just too much of it going around. So
yeah.
their own base is going to take it in the ass as hard as anybody else.
Well, this is why
The
they're
homeowners,
so unutterably fucked.
are being punished, and the homeowners are being literally punished right now, and that was meant to be the great aspiration of Tory societies: make us all stakeholders, make us all homeholders. And those are the people who are being punished right now. If anything, just as hard
Mm.
as the people in social housing.
Well, there's been
you know
big like studies about this where if you give people home ownership, if they have that stake in society, they actually tend to be significantly more settled, less likely to riot, less
Yes.
volatile, less divisive. And this is one of the things that, I guess Thatcher probably read up on and bought into. She was like, I can probably maintain my grip on power if I just keep everyone relatively. I mean, I'm not sure it totally worked out with the mines and everything, but
yeah. But you can there is a principle at play there,
yeah,
even if it's one which doesn't actually work that well, and not something on which not necessarily everybody would subscribe to. But the idea of a stakeholder society, the idea that you give people a stake in society, you make people feel involved in society, and that they are, a part of the process and an active part of the process, rather than just a sort of a dumb recipient of the process.
yeah.
Then that increases engagement, blah 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 blah. You see that there is a principle at whether. I don't think that's what we're looking at right now. I think what we're looking at right now is just A, greed, and B, running out of ideas.
I think yes. So, but also, like it's like our situation in Britain over the last 20 years with the housing crisis just slowly crescendoing into this. Like, I mean, there's pretty much no way back now. At some point, there will be a gigantic correction and house prices will come down because there just won't be anybody to buy them at the level that they are, other than banks. Maybe that's the plan. I don't know. But anyway, it's also true over in the US. Like, home ownership has gradually it's gone further and further out of reach for everyday people. I don't think it's a coincidence that as people no longer have that stake in society, as they do feel more brittle, less invested, less like, I'm trying to think of the right way to articulate this, but like, if you have a mortgage,
less integrated, less like they don't feel like stakeholders.
Yeah, but they just feel sort of more at risk. Like, if you're in a private rental agreement and you know that at any moment your private landlord could go, "Yeah, I want the fucking house back. Get your shit and get out."
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Then you feel brittle, you feel at risk, and maybe you are more likely to riot. And I think as home ownership has disappeared for a huge chunk of people, maybe there is something psychological in that you want to feel in control, and so you jump on Twitter, and this is a way for me to feel like I am.
Well, certainly, it's as something a topic of conversation comes around a lot is that essentially that whole thing that people tend to get more conservative as they get older isn't happening for my generation and below.
No, yeah.
Bang in the middle of Gen X. I was born in 1970. But the Gen Xers, the millennials, and the Gen Zs will never. It'll be 20 years before we find out about the Gen Zs. But the millennials are all turning 40. The millennials are all, my generation, we're in our 50s and 60s now. We're supposed to be properly Tory by now. The millennials are turning 40 and they're meant to be starting to get a bit impatient with socialism a bit. But the difference is from my generation onwards, we never became stakeholders. We never became property owners. We never became established in, comfortably settled in a proper career.
Yeah.
That didn't happen for us. Most of us are still renting. Most of us are still, in the gig economy, even those of us with white collar jobs who could be out on our ass in any minute. So we never became sort of comfortably off.
Yeah.
Even those of us with money aren't comfortably off because the money is random.
Yeah.
And comes and goes in fits and starts. So that kind of middle-aged comfort, that kind of middle-aged smugness has never set in the Gen Xers and below. And this is a real demographic issue for the Conservatives going forward.
Because their voters keep dying.
Yeah, exactly. Essentially, their base, you're absolutely right. Their base is dying off.
Yeah.
Because it's only the boomers. The boomers are the last generation that this worked for. And the boomers are in their 70s now.
Yeah.
The boomers gonna die.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right. And it's
in 10 years, there's not going to be that many boomers left. My generation, the Gen Xers, we're going to be the retirees who are supposed to be propping up the Conservative Party. But the thing is, most of us won't be fucking retired.
Yeah.
Because we won't be able to afford to retire. Most of my generation are going to work into the grave.
Yeah.
Whether because we drop dead of stress age 50.
But isn't that inspiring, Mitch? Because I read this article the other week around the coronation time. I'm sure it was nothing to do with like Buckingham Palace sanctioned propaganda or anything, but I'm sure that it was about King Charles, and it said, King Charles is an example to us all because he's still out there working in his 70s. So
define working, motherfucker.
Yeah. It's a hard day's work cutting that ribbon,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
having your ass wiped.
So, well, I mean, this is again is something I said in my column. In the plug my column. I write a weekly column in the New European.
Yeah,
That's the other.
great,
But so I
great
said,
publication. Yeah,
I have a horrible feeling that Charles and whichever gang of Grima Wormtongues he's got advising him at the moment have made a serious miscalculation, which is they looked at things like the Golden Jubilee, the Diamond Jubilee, and then the Queen's funeral, and they thought, "Wow, look at the amazing respect there is for the crown out there in the country." It wasn't for the crown, mate. It was for her.
yeah,
It was personal. It was personal affection and loyalty to her. And you don't get to inherit that along with everything else.
yeah.
That was a personal loyalty that people felt to her, not to the institution, not to the family, not to the monarchy as a concept. It was to that old lady.
Mm.
And she's gone now.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you don't get to inherit the love that people had for her along with all her houses and jewels.
This is like I've been saying this for about 10 years, man. Like that once she dies, and obviously now that has happened.
Yeah.
But I was like, they have like one opportunity to effectively save the monarchy.
Yeah.
And that is to
Dial it down to Norway levels.
I was going to say to circumvent, to go around Charles and just make William and Kate king and queen, because
Yeah.
they're this sort of younger generation. You could make a case that they are more idealistic, that they'd have more vision for the future of the monarchy. They're more popular, I think, than he is. I think this idea that look, obviously it's the nature of a monarchy that he inherit, this idea that he goes straight into that role and then expects to have the same love and adulation as his mother did, I think is a bit fanciful. He's not that popular. He does come off as grumpy. People don't really warm to him in the same way. Now I think they've actually left it too late, firstly because he is king, but secondly I don't think William and Kate are as popular now amongst the younger generations. I think they warm more to Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, no, I mean, no, I'm absolutely Team Harry on all this. I remember thinking back in '97, watching Diana's funeral and seeing those two little lads behind the coffin. I remember literally thinking to myself, one of them's going to fuck off.
Yeah.
One of those two, I don't know which, but one of them is going to be is going to be grown up, is going to be in his late 20s or 30s or something. He's going to look at all this and think, you know what? Fuck all this. I'm going to LA and I'm starting a band. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it took longer and it wasn't quite like that, but I was born out in there. I remember thinking one of these is going to go, what the fuck does any of this shit mean?
Yeah.
And ultimately realize that they've got. And here's the thing, what people don't really get is that what Harry's got that he can essentially parlay for the rest of his life is something you cannot take away from him, and that's profile.
Yeah. But that's gift and a
you can
curse.
kick him off the civil list, you can remove his security detail, but what you can't do is make him not famous.
Yeah. And popular and seen as a sort of, I mean, it's such a bizarre turn of events that somebody as privileged and gilded as he and his life has always been. It's weird that he could now be seen as a sort of underdog, isn't it? And but he is.
Well, in terms of the royal family, absolutely is.
Yeah.
And no, it's quite extraordinary. But the whole. I mean, yeah, it's.
Do you think we'll see a referendum about the monarchy in the next 25 years?
Well, no. Well, probably not in my lifetime. I don't know.
Don't you think? I wouldn't rule it out.
I'm rather hoping that people have gone off referendums because they're actually generally a bit of a bad idea. I mean, because here's the thing about because obviously I've been very, very vocal in the Remain movement ever since it's been a thing. And part of the trouble with referendums is this. We don't live in a direct democracy. We live in a representative democracy. The whole point is MPs are not delegates. We don't send them to enact our decisions. We send them to make decisions on our behalf, right? That's the way it's supposed to work. Because at the end of the day, it's not that, because this kind of sounds like a condescending attitude that, the affairs of state are too complicated for the ordinary person to understand. No, the point is the affairs of state are too complicated for anybody to understand in their spare time, right? That's why we employ people to understand them, and they employ an entire army of civil servants to explain it to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, this shit's complicated, and these decisions need to be taken by people who are informed. We are not informed. You
Yeah.
know, reading the Daily Mail does not count as informed. Reading the Guardian does not count as informed. You know, and spending your entire fucking life on BuzzFeed definitely doesn't count as informed. So the point is, we are not in a position to make informed decisions. That's why we have a representative democracy, and that's why, ironically, it's always the really big stuff that they put to referendum, which is the stuff that the general public are least qualified to hold an opinion on. You
Well,
know,
yeah.
that's the
So,
whole
like,
thing, you know.
I would
Go on.
agree with the Brexit question, if you like. I
Yeah.
do like. I think something as intrinsic and complex and integrated and icky as our relationship with the EU. I agree. I think that is a too complicated question for the general public to answer with a yes or no. I think that's that has now played out. That stands to it'll be written in the
Yeah.
history books that it was too complicated and we never should have put it to a referendum. However, with the monarchy, that is quite a simple question. It's
I
like,
suppose. Yeah.
and interestingly, like you mentioned about winding it down to Norway levels.
Yeah.
That would be my utopian scenario. Would be like, look, don't get rid of it. I accept it's part of our national identity, and there's some of you
Yeah.
out there who want to run around and pretend it's the 17th century or whatever, and wave your flags. Great, have a fucking good time. Go and cosplay. Go and pay 20 quid to go into a theme park. But
Yeah.
but I don't think we need to be spending and funding their like weird fucking PR departments and seeing
No.
pictures of Kate on the front of every newspaper every other day. I just don't think in a country that's sliding this aggressively into inequality that we need to have this like super privileged family with tens of millions of pounds. Like King Charles is a fucking billionaire.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's still getting us to write checks for him. It's just like,
Yeah, I
come
think
on,
getting us
lads,
to
what
pay
we
for the,
doing?
I think getting us to pay for the coronation was. I mean, this is the other thing is that, I don't know who their bloody advisors are, but their PR is fucking woeful because it's like, first of all, we find out we're paying for the coronation of the richest man in the country.
Yeah,
So first of all, he's throwing a massive party for himself so that he can be awarded his special diamond hat, and we're paying for it. And then this announcement that, oh, and by the way, you're all supposed to take the Pledge of Allegiance. And it's just like, oh, do fuck off. I mean, I
yeah,
do realize that, this stuff has to be held together with this sort of cod Harry Potter mumbo jumbo because reasons. But, it's just, no. I mean, like, pay a bit of attention to what bloody century you're in.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's yeah, like I said, I think the mistake they've made is confusing personal loyalty to the Queen to national devotion to the Crown, and these are not interchangeable concepts.
No,
And I think they're going to find that out in a bit. Yeah, it's. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I suspect that you, like me, are what you would call royal agnostic. I am neither in the God bless your Majesty nor string the buggers up camp.
yeah,
Uh, and in one respect, because here's the thing, the two words to say why, when people say why can't we have an elected head of state, the two words that really do for that argument are President Boris, but by the same token, the two words that very succinctly make the opposite case are King Andrew.
yeah, yeah,
That was a bullet dodged. At least as far as this guy isn't a rampaging fucking nonce, but as far as anybody. But yeah, and of course this is the whole thing is it's just like there's a play by Peter Barnes called The Ruling Class, which I think they made into a movie with Peter O'Toole. I saw a production of it in Liverpool back in the 80s with Tim McInerney, which is about there's this an old duke wanks himself to death, or basically dies in an act of autoerotic stimulation, and so the dukedom falls upon his son, who has been missing for years, and they track him down, and essentially he's been on some kind of spiritual quest and now thinks he's Jesus, right?
right.
So they drag him back to the country seat, and he's got hair down to his arse and is wearing a kind of nightie, and is generally a mortifying embarrassment to everybody, despite the fact he's completely benign because he thinks he's Jesus, right? And they try all kinds of therapies to snap him out of it. They eventually do, with this rather brutal therapy, manage to snap him out of it. So now he is, in the second half of the play, the beard's gone, the hair's gone, and he's wearing a proper suit, and he's referring to himself as Lord whatever, and all is well, is good. But of course, they've driven him completely mad to the point where he basically thinks he's Jack the Ripper and starts murdering women and like burying
Right.
them in the. But none of this matters because he is behaving himself properly. He is now observing the correct social mores that befit his station. So the family just cover up for the fact that they've now got a garden full of corpses. And that is really sort of illustrated with the sort of the official attitudes to sort of Harry and Andrew. Which Andrew, it would appear, has been doing some genuinely very bad things with some genuinely very bad people. But that doesn't matter because, he still turns up and he still puts all the bleeding ermine on and he's still sort of observing the rules that befit his station. Harry fell in love with a strong-minded woman, decided he wasn't going to let them do to her what they did to his mum, and fucked off.
Yeah, and they hate him.
Harry is protecting his family.
Yeah.
But because he's essentially run off with a not entirely white strong-willed woman, now he's beyond the pale, and he will never be spoken of in polite society again. And it's almost like it's almost parodic in the obviousness of what people's. I mean, we're long overdue a proper conversation about class in this country because it has reasserted itself in the last 15 years or so to a really grotesque degree. And I think people are mistaken about what class actually means. I think when people think you refer to somebody's class, it's a socioeconomic descriptor. It refers to what kind of job they've got, how big their house is, what kind of car they drive. That's not what it means at all. And we used to understand this. It's basically a biological term. When people talk about class, they mean it as literally as when they were talking about horses. I mean, when people say breeding now, they think they mean the guy knows his way around a set of cutlery.
Right.
But it used to be literally breeding, as in he is the product of superior bloodlines.
Right.
And this hasn't been really spoken out loud ever since the First World War. Ever since the First World War, you're not really meant to say any of this shit out loud. That certain people are just inherently better than others. And that certain people are just inherently worse than others and less value than others. They haven't really said that out loud since the First World War. And since the First World War, we've been pretending that class is, like I say, a socioeconomic descriptor. It's not. It's a biological term of reference.
Yeah.
And the people at the top end of this of the pyramid, if you like, have never really changed their minds about this.
Yeah.
They've never really changed their minds about this. They still, I mean, chippy plebs, we tend to get it arse about face. We tend to think the upper classes think they're better than us because they're rich. No, the upper classes think they're rich because they're better than us.
Right.
Their wealth is merely a manifestation of their superiority, but the point is that they are superior.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? Of course, I've got more money than you. I'm a better class of person than you. I'm bound to have more money than you.
Yeah.
And this again, I mean, this is somebody I was thinking about. There are different ways to respond to unearned privilege. And I like to think, I think part of the reason that, I mean, I try to be as staunch an ally as possible, despite having, it's precisely because I know I've got all the advantages. It's precisely because I'm not only a cishet white guy, I'm a big, strong cishet white guy. I'm also, I like to think, quite a smart, big, strong cishet white guy. I was born holding all the cards, and I know that. And as such, I regard it as my job to try and, protect and wherever possible, help out the people who were born with fewer cards in their hand than me. Because these are the two ways you can respond to unearned privilege. You can either go, okay, I've got all these advantages. I didn't do anything to earn them. I didn't do anything to deserve them. I've just got them. So it is therefore beholden upon me to use these privileges I've got to try and help other people. Because the other attitude you can take, and this is where the Boris Johnsons and the David Camerons of the world go wrong, is you think to yourself, okay, I've got all these unearned advantages. I didn't do anything to deserve them. I've just got them. So that must mean I'm special. That must mean I'm just better than everyone else.
Yeah.
Because look at all these advantages I've got. I didn't do anything to earn them. They're just mine. So that means I'm special and better. Do you know what I mean? And that is the other attitude to unearned privileges. And that is what you see in the British ruling classes in spades.
Yeah.
This is why they sneer at the nouveau riche. This is why Alan Clark disparagingly wrote about Michael Heseltine and called him the sort of chap who buys his own furniture.
Yeah.
Because they genuinely think that inherited privilege is the only one that counts.
Yeah.
They genuinely think that inherited money is the only real money, because that is a sign of your superior bloodlines.
Yeah.
Any
But it's
pleb
interesting.
any pleb can go out and make money,
Yeah.
but we are the real, we are the really special ones because we were born into it.
Yeah.
And we are long overdue a proper conversation about what class actually means. It's interesting the way they actually use horse breeding terms to describe themselves. They talk, because actually, they talk about superior bloodlines, and he comes from good stock.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
did you ever hear a posh guy call a working class girl a filly?
No.
No, filly means the daughters of the rich and privileged. That's what filly means. You know what I
Really?
mean? Yeah. So they use these. They actually use horse breeding terminology to talk about themselves.
I think horse
in a
breeding
way.
technology would have been like.
Horse breeding technology, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one could argue that, and of course the funny thing is, the rational thing is, on any kind of empirical level, they're all, genetically crippled from centuries of fucking each other's cousins and then emotionally spat by public school. So in actual fact, on a scientific level, they're probably, the least capable people that our society ever generates.
It's interesting, isn't it? Like, yeah, because when they have this sort of superiority complex, and then you take a look at them, and you're like,
no, yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Well, it's like white supremacists.
I'm superior.
When did you ever look at a white supremacist and think, oh yeah, that's what supreme looks like?
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I wish I was a part of that master race over there. And they're just
Absolutely.
like,
yeah, this is a guy who reckons he's genetically superior to Neil Tyson and Beyonce.
yeah, fucking ridiculous. Mitch, we're out of time.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me. Guys,
thank you. Thank you.
Give Mitch Benn a follow on Twitter if you're not doing so already. Have you got a website, Mitch?
I've got mitchbenn.com. Yeah, I am the
mitchbenn.com.
easiest guy in the world to find online. My Twitter handle, Mitch Benn. My Facebook name, Mitch Benn. My website, mitchbenn.com. My email, mitch@mitchbenn.com. I like to be approachable, but it does mean you get approached.
Yeah. Well, listen, guys, don't be strangers to Mitch. Jump on mitchbenn.com. Have you got like work in progress shows lined up? Like,
well, I mean, yeah, I've got shows. I forget where they are actually. I mean, I could look it up. Oh, I can't be bothered. I know I've got.
We'll just get the listeners to do it. They can do the hard work.
I'm gonna put. I've got some dates coming in. I'm gonna get them up on mitchbenn.com the minute I hang up, so they will be going up. But I do know I've got a preview for the Edinburgh show at the Bedford Fringe, on July 23rd. And then the Edinburgh show it's already on sale. It's got a name. It's got a title. I just have to write it now. It's called The Point. It's on at 4 p.m. at the Underbelly. And that will be happening, for the whole of August.
Yeah.
And now there's always and read my books, read my sci-fi books. Search me out. You can get them on Amazon and anywhere else. They're called Terror, Terror's War, and Terror's World, and Terror's War. That's my sci-fi trilogy. Particularly keen to get people to read those because it'd be lovely to be able to write books for a living. That'd be great. That'd be fantastic.
Then you just need like 100 people who buy your books like once a year as well. That can like build
well,
up.
Actually, or kind of like 30 or 40,000 people to buy your books once a year, and then you're laughing. But
that's the dream. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically.
Okay, cool. Guys, jump onto mitchbenn.com now. Check out his shows. Check out his books on Amazon. I'll be back next Wednesday with the solo show, once again trying to make sense of the senseless. Until next time, keep yourselves #Binfluencer. Keep yourselves proper booge. We're out.